Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Officials in the Union Home Ministry on Tuesday reviewed the situation along the Sino-Indian border following tensions in areas in Sikkim after a scuffle between personnel of the Indian Army and the People's Liberation Army. Of the 3,488 kilometer Sino-Indian border from Jammu and Kashmir to Arunachal Pradesh, 220 kilometers falls in Sikkim. The scuffle between the Indian Army and the PLA led to Chinese troops damaging bunkers on the Indian side. The incident happened in the first week of June. After the incident, China stopped the travel of Indian pilgrims to Kailash Mansarovar through the Natla border post in Sikkim. China on Tuesday lodged a protest with India over the alleged crossing of boundary by its troops in the Sikkim sector and demanded their immediate withdrawal. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at the India-China standoff on the Sikkim border. Joining me on the program today are Kadyan, former Deputy Chief of Army Staff; Jayant Jacob, Senior Assistant Editor, Hindustan Times; Sheel Sharma, former Ambassador; and Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, Director, Society for Policy Studies. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. General, I'd like to begin with you. How serious is the situation? Would you dismiss it as routine, or do you think it's more than that?
This kind of confrontation or jostling, I won't call it scuffle, is not new. It has happened earlier. They don't carry weapons. The last shooting on the Sino-Indian border was in 1967 in Nathula area. After that, there has been tension. But this recent this is not the cause of the souring of relation between the two countries. I think this is a result of that. It could be related to Mr. Modi's visit to America and Chinese apprehension that we may join up America in checking or checkmating China in the South China Sea. That could be one reason. Of course, China has miffed at us because we have opened a freight corridor with Afghanistan, which is bypassing their CPEC. We have objected to CPEC on our sovereignty ground. We didn't join the OBO talks. That is why China is not only this, it is also blocking our NSG entry and not agreeing to Azhar Masood being declared an international terrorist. But this kind of jostling, it happened in Nathula in 2009. It also happened in Shumar in 2013 Ladakh. The one reason, if we don't take the other factors into account, could be there is lack of clarity in the demarcation of the border. The Chumbi Valley that comes from Tibet and tapers down to a tip with Bhutan on the east side and Sikkim on the west side. In the north side, the watershed principle, the ridge lines are sharper. It is easier to identify. As it comes south, the hills get lower and they get flatter. Dokala is almost in the south of the Sikkim Chumbi Valley border.
Right.
So it could be possible confusion. Similarly, Chinese media must be reporting that we have done incursion there. So it is common. But I don't think there is any danger of conflagration or any shooting or anything flaring up.
Sure. Ambassador, the General did mention about, Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States. Every time there is a high-level visit of this kind, we see some kind of tension, either if it be it with Pakistan or be it with China. Every time, even the previous time when Prime Minister Modi was visiting China, we saw a similar kind of an incident take place on the line of actual control. So do you think that it has anything to do with Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States?
I would not, one should see it clinically, because if you begin to see yourself these things in a larger perspective, you are falling into a trap. If you see the Chinese spokesperson's statement, it is very clear, saying that there was an action taken which was probably not acceptable to them. Because of that, they need a security thing to be clarified, and until that is done, they have stopped the pilgrims. So it is just these 3-4 things. We should also, and the Foreign Office spokesman also said, yes, there has been some action and we are looking at it. So there is already a mechanism to, as General Saab mentioned, these things have happened in the past, these are jostling. And if I remember correctly, the last time the firing took place was in 1975, not after that. So it is not that kind of a configuration. And there is already a mechanism. From 93 onwards, there has been this mechanism about tranquility in the, to how to maintain it. Next month, the National Security Advisor is going to be in Beijing, and the Special Representatives group already has a National Security Advisor and his counterpart in China. So there are these mechanisms in place. So we should see, and how they should be able to take care of this. So one should see it in that kind of a domain in which it has happened, and not expand it to a larger thing. The last point I'd like to mention is that when Xi Jinping was here, at that time when their president was here, even then there was an incident.
Yes.
And then he went back and he pulled up the PLA and and he was head of the commission, their defense. So, but then after that we've had things going with China.
Localized skirmishes is what we can dismiss it as. Fair enough. All right. Jayant, let me bring you into the picture now. Considering that India-China relations have not been at their best at the moment, can we expect more of this to happen, more skirmishes maybe on the line of action control?
I think if you see what is happening of late, there is a coincidence. There is too much of coincidence when it comes to this kind of incursions. Throughout history, it's there since 1979 when Vajpayee went to Beijing, or Premier Li Ka-ching visited India in 2013. President Xi came to India. Something or the other happened on this line. So this is not completely new what is happening now. But you are right when you pointed out that the kind of relationship between India and China now, this kind of skirmishes I would expect to happen again. For example, there is a great deal of friction between two sides on the issues of sovereignty. China is not taking very kindly to the way Narendra Modi government is treating Dalai Lama, various functions, and the Prime Minister in exile is attending his swearing into various kind of things. And when it comes to certain Chinese action, India is also not taking lightly when it comes to issues of sovereignty. Since 2014, you have a sovereignty issue which is South China Sea in a bilateral document which is India-US joint statement. And also India abstained from OBOR, which is a marquee signature kind of project of President Xi, citing reasons of sovereignty, concerns of sovereignty. I think this being the case, this kind of issues are bound to happen more. That is my reading. But at the same time, as the Ambassador and General pointed out, this is one of the most tranquil border you can see anywhere in the world. So to dismiss everything being a hostile atmosphere or building up of tension is not right. There are enough mechanisms, there are enough political will on both sides to get them sorted. That's what I think.
Fair enough. Commodore, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. Like everyone else has pointed out, and like the General has pointed out earlier as well, the border itself, or the line of actual control, is not very well demarcated, and that leads to several problems and has led to problems in the past as well. Could this particular incident have just been caused because of that?
Frank, I would say that this is a sequence of events that cannot quite be dismissed. If I could just add to what the other panelists have already pointed out, I think if you look at the last 3 or 4 decades, while we have had a pattern of transgressions / incursions, and my recall is that in 2016, we had as many as 250 such incidents, whether they are incursions or transgressions. So we are talking of almost one every other day, 250 over a 365 calendar year, 365-day calendar year. But there is one kind of characteristic, which is that the Sikkim area, the so-called middle sector, has been relatively incident-free. So if you map these incidents, my reading is that they have occurred either on the west or the east. And therefore, if now this has been brought into the grid, I would interpret this as a case of Beijing deliberately raising the ante. You look at the nature of the protests, and also almost when Prime Minister Modi was in the US meeting President Donald Trump, we had some very vitriolic kind of editorial observations being made in the Chinese media, particularly newspapers like the Global Times. Now, I concede the Global Times is not the Foreign Office of Beijing, but at the same time, in China, there is a certain pattern to how events are shaped. So therefore, at this point, I would not dismiss it. And as I said, Prime Minister Modi made a statement when he was in Russia, if I remember right, where he said for 40 years a shot has not been fired in anger. I hope the resilience in the system is adequate to be able to absorb the kind of spikes that we are now seeing.
Fair enough. General, I'd like to bring you in with what Commodore has just said. You know, Sikkim has been fairly peaceful all throughout, is what he has said. And he has said that, you know, this sudden transgression in Sikkim is clearly pointing towards the fact that China is probably upping the ante, because so far Sikkim has been relatively quiet. Do you think that that's what's happening? And also, a lot of talk has been made about mechanism and how there are mechanisms in place to deal with several of these issues. What are the kind of mechanisms that are in place to deal with these issues on a local level?
Yes. At local level, whenever a confrontation like this takes place, commanders on both sides come and meet and the issue is resolved. The troops pull back. So that is in place. As the ambassador said, in 93 there was an agreement, some kind of a confidence building, and everything comes on that table and things get resolved. I don't think we should overplay this incident. This is not isolated. This is a message that China is sending that they can be troublesome. Earlier, Sikkim has been peaceful. There was a reason. Chinese had difficulty in building up their forces in Tibet. In fact, as per our appreciation, if Chinese meant any trouble in Sikkim, they would need 2 seasons to build up the required forces. But after they brought the railway, so it is like part of mainland China. It's a question of hours where they can build up. But I don't think this incident by itself, this is related to overall souring of relations, China being unhappy on various other accounts. This is just a manifestation of that. This is not the cause of the tension. And I don't think anything serious is likely to happen. That mechanism is there. Commanders meet very commonly and they will resolve the issue. It needs to be underplayed as far as I know. Sikkim's peacefulness, yes, Sikkim has been peaceful. They don't have many troops in the Chumbi Valley. It's very thinly held, except Nathula perhaps was held reasonably well. South of that, Chinese didn't have much deployment. And Dokala is almost the southernmost pass in that Chumbi Valley. So I think it is an isolated incident, it needs to be underplayed. Not the first time it has happened. It happened also in Arunachal, where there was a physical jostling between the two sides. But nothing happened more than that. There is no shooting, nor is it likely that this incident will lead to any serious conflagration. Neither country is interested in heightening the tensions.
And escalation is going to be counterproductive to both countries.
Yeah, they are economic development, they have other priorities.
Sure.
So why should China has been very, very deliberate in its foreign policy.
Sure.
They don't go by small incidents.
Indeed. But Ambassador, a lot of posturing has been happening on both. We've seen, you know, like Jayant rightly mentioned about the Dalai Lama's visit to Arunachal Pradesh, and a lot of other things have taken place which have miffed China. And China is, you know, in the mood to pick a bone with India, it looks like at the moment.
I think I would contest that, you know, when you say miff China, it seems to say as though we have made some mistake.
No, but the Chinese look at it as a mistake.
So,
yes, we have.
One should be careful. One should be careful. Chinese are, you know, they have this overbearing thing all through. It is not new. They would always like to make the other person feel guilty. You never heard in the history that Chinese have ever accepted that they were wrong or they have erred. Every time other guys made a mistake, and he has to come and kneel and kowtow and you know. So that attitude they have. We got to deal with that attitude. So
the approach that we are using with China at the moment, the diplomatic approach that we're using, do you believe that that is the right way forward?
Well, you know, we have to, that is for the, you know, it's a very elaborate exercise which is done at the level of the Prime Minister and the Special Envoy and Foreign Secretary, you know, and they are abreast at these things. So we should leave it at them. And let's hear what the spokesman has to say, what MEA has to say after PM returns. The thing is that China has been, ever since 2010 or so, 29, when 2010, 2009, has been more assertive. So the kind of mechanism that we've had in place till then, and mechanism which probably are required now, maybe we'll have to have a look at them, because China is moving in a different way. I mean, the kind of, sometimes the Global Times and sometimes even the spokesman or spokesperson's statements, they have a certain, you know, tinge which is not very diplomatic. So, like for instance, take the NSG issue. On that, they said that circumstances have changed since last year. Now, what circumstances have changed? So, this kind of a Chinese language, if you were to, our China watchers take note of these words. So, we have to be careful what they are saying. The whole point is that China is, ever since India started coming closer to USA, China is uneasy. But there is a diplomatic kind of a thing that if India is lost and lonely, they are happy. So, it's like Virginia Woolf said that they like you in pity. So, you know, but you know, as a country like India, you got to be on your own. So, and what we are doing with the US is, like the joint statement has not a word against China. It is just building up India and US.
Sure.
Same way with Russia, what we are doing it. So, and what about China working with Pakistan? Where it is, and I want to make a point here.
Yes.
You see, India, China, we have a border problem. We deal with bilaterally. No third party involved. China has other problems with other third countries. India never pokes its nose. If China has a problem with any other, we don't come in the way. But here we have a problem with Pakistan. China is poking its nose there. So, it is transgression at a different
and that's
level.
the bottom line.
As a different level.
Sure.
And that's the reason why India has to express a certain anguish.
Sure.
But it is done, you know, in the way that we have been doing so far.
Fair enough. You know, Jayant, the NSA is scheduled to visit next month. What can we expect out of it?
I think all these issues will be taken up, but at the same I would like to say something. Ambassador is right, because if you look at Chinese statements on various issues, it was always putting down India in various aspects. Even you go back to 2003 statement when Vajpayee visited Beijing, so there was a reference to Sikkim as Indian state, but Chinese spokesperson soon after the visit said India accepted Sikkim as an inalienable part of China. This China has been playing, but I have a different point to make, because the top level conversation, which was one thing which you have seen UPA 1 and UPA 2 and the first 1 year of this government as well, there used to be frequent exchanges between the two sides at the highest level. There are so many ways it can be done, and there are many forums where the leadership of the two countries come together. They are part of it, various multilateral forums, etc. When there was a lag in that, a lot of problems came up. That is a fact. I think when NSA goes there, the last time when Prime Minister met President Xi on the sidelines of SEO, Indian Foreign Secretary said the high level exchanges should continue, political contact should continue, etc. and it should be done at very frequently. I think when you have that kind of frequent exchanges between these two countries, it always helps both sides. I don't think India is in a position to take on China beyond a rhetoric level, nor will be China interested in taking.
Add to what you are saying, when Xi Jinping and President and Prime Minister Modi met, everything seemed hunky-dory, everything seemed right. And you know, to just further the point that you're making, so these high-level meetings do need to take place to ensure that both the countries know what is happening.
I think at that time when they were meeting on the sidelines of SEO, the priority of both sides were to arrest the slide. Because that's why if you look at Prime Minister's statement in Russia, like our Commodore before said, so he said that 40 years there was not a single fire shot on the border. So that was one statement which China welcomed too much. But at the same time, I would like to make one last point.
Sure.
When it comes to China, what happens is that one section of the argument is that China is too great a friend to India, or China is an enemy. I think the middle kingdom should be seen somewhere in the middle. I think this approach of taking the China policy or debating China issues from the extreme point of view will not help Indian cause.
Indeed, indeed. You know, let's just to take the debate forward, Commodore, you know, the Chinese media and the Chinese have been very closely watching Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States. Several articles were written in Chinese media as well, talking about, you know, they were clearly very unhappy with the drone deal being struck between India and the United States. Now, taking all that into consideration, there is bound to be some kind of tension in the Indian Ocean region as well, because there is a joint military exercise that is scheduled to take place next month between India, US and Japan as well, and that is something that the Chinese will be looking at very closely.
You're absolutely right, Frank. I think Beijing is very concerned about various naval/maritime initiatives that India has embarked upon. And I just want to go back a little bit and remind ourselves that when we had the Modi-Obama statement you will recall that for the first time there was an explicit reference to the South China Sea. Starting from there, Beijing has been extremely uneasy, and I would say also in a way they express their anger, if you will, in different ways, that India was getting involved, as they saw, in the affairs of the South China Sea, which they would have preferred to retain it in the bilateral framework between China and the concerned ASEAN state, which is not how it panned out, except of course Philippines, etc., which is a different story. But more recently, after Prime Minister's visit to the US and the joint statement that came out, I was looking at the Chinese blogs and some of the Chinese media as available in translation. And again, there was a sense of what I would call as they were irate, that India had drawn attention to 2 or 3 aspects without quite referring to China, as one of our panelists pointed out. But the subtext is clear, meaning that again we upheld the freedom of navigation. Now, this in itself is not new. India has been saying this from UPA 1, UPA 2 right through to where we are now. But interestingly, there was one phrase about the need to have transparency in regional economic connectivity. Now, that's a straight reference to the One Belt, One Road initiative. Yes. And towards the end of the statement, India has now welcomed the entry of the United States to the Indian Ocean Symposium as an observer. Now, it may not happen in a hurry, but again, Beijing sees this as a case of greater proximity between India and the United States in the maritime domain. And finally, the last straw is the Malabar exercise, where the fact that Japan is coming on board is something that is again causing more than dismay. And I think all of this put together is, as I said, encouraging or perhaps providing the traction or the motivation to Beijing to raise the ante, and which is why I see that Sikkim has happened. And more importantly, this is my last point, Frank, that the Mansarovar issue has also now brought in, meaning that they are now trying to use this leverage, and they are very upfront about it. If you see the statement of the foreign ministry spokesman, they are saying that unless India, in a way, withdraws from whatever it has done on what they see as their side, we will continue to do this. So that's my point, saying that they have raised the ante visibly. One, what is happening tactically on the ground. Two, the official response from the Foreign Office in Beijing. So therefore, my poser as an analyst is, for a long time we said Sino-Indian relations are characterized by strategic restraint at the highest level, but a certain degree of tactical turbulence. Will that stay? That's my question.
Fair enough. It's now time to get final comments from all my guests, starting with you, General. A lot has been said about how China has been aggressive, and clearly the world is taking notice of what has happened. The OBOR was not, was not very forthcoming as far as the Europeans were concerned. They were not very happy with the OBOR. So do you see, a change taking place where everyone else is going to try and align themselves with each other to try and put China in place in the days to come?
Well, China would feel so that India is joining the rest of the world, at least the US, in trying to curb Chinese growth. China is growing into a superpower, and their trajectory is still heading north. There is no denying that fact. They see India as the only rival in this region who can perhaps stand up to them at some time or the other. So it is but natural that they will try everything to keep India down. They are needling India in various things, but not in a major way. They have huge trade interest in India. I don't think they will sacrifice that. Even they have needled even Salahuddin case. They have sided with Pakistan and they have criticized US. Why
that's nothing new.
No, it is needling India.
Yes.
They have no concern with it. Yes. But it is needling India.
Sure.
So I think all this is related. This is not an isolated incident, I would say. This will pass off. In a day or two, the troops will pull back. They have already, commanders have met, and I don't think there is any chance of any the escalation of the situation. But this kind of needling by China against India will continue. Nor are, of course, the ambassador is an expert on it, nor are international relations ever proceeding on a linear fashion. There are issues mixed. For example, America grouped India and China on the Paris peace talks. They said these countries are milking the developed world billions of dollars on this pretext. So it is not that everything that America says will be anti-China and pro-India. It depends. Americans have their own interests.
Indeed.
Diplomacy is the basis of self-interest.
Indeed. So,
but I think it's high time we got closer to Japan.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Ambassador, do you believe that there are areas of convergence between India and China, and we might tap into that as well?
Well, you know, at the moment, as Commodore Uday Bhaskar mentioned, I'd like to highlight that point. The Mansovar pilgrims, you know, they are put in a very awkward position, and that is an embarrassment to Government of India.
Yes.
So somehow this should be resolved. Chinese should not do this, because this whole thing was started at a moment when we were starting basic CBMs, and started way back in the 80s when.
So how do we resolve it?
So both have to talk and somehow the other.
So there has to be some kind of give and take as far as India, rather give from India's side, so as to ensure that the Chinese ensure that the Mansarovar Yatra continues.
Well, you know, it is, you have to leave it to our diplomats to work out and our people. But it is not fair for China, because if something is happening at the border, it's a different kind of a game. But there are civilians who are coming there, whom China has permitted to go to Mansarovar. Now they are saying we make extra effort, we do a lot of, we spend a lot of time and energy and probably make preparations for that visit. So they say we are miffed because of that, and so this thing is held up.
Sure.
And no, this is childish.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. 1 minute left on the program. Quick closing comment from you, Jayant, and then from you, Commodore.
I think India has to be more realistic when it comes to its China policy. Second, any belief that the Americans will bring deliverance to you in times of trouble, I think it's a misplaced notion. Third, all your issues should be sorted out bilaterally through high-level exchanges and frequent exchanges between two foreign officers and the mechanisms which are in place.
All right. Commodore, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I hope that the highest levels of political leadership in both countries remain committed to the Asian century. If that objective is there, hopefully these kind of issues should be addressed at a lower level of engagement.
So, Asia first is how India and China should look at it. On that note, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Raj Kadyan, Jayant Jacob, Sheel, Kant, Sharma, Uday Bhaskar. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.